Welcome to Mastering the Numbers, your go-to podcast for a deep dive into the world of business and entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Joe Mallo. Join me as I sit down with successful business owners to uncover their journeys, learnings, successes, and future plans. From market trends to personal stories of triumph, Mastering the Numbers delivers invaluable insights to fuel your own entrepreneurial spirit. So grab a seat and get ready to be inspired.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mastering the Numbers. I am Joe Mallo with the Lead Edge Consulting Group. We are powered by Focal Point Business and Executive Coaching. My guest today is Dr. Sarah Crawford. She is the founder of Anchor Wellness Center. Thanks for taking part in the interview series.
Thank you. I'm really excited to join you. Appreciate you
Yeah,
asking me.
Yeah, absolutely. We were excited to have you on. Tell the audience a little bit about Anchor Wellness Center, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, it goes back a little bit, but I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I've been practicing for 14 years, and somehow my postdoctoral studies sort of took me on this path of working with more complex patients, and I naturally found myself gravitating towards working with other professionals. So with physicians, with psychologists, with personal trainers, with coaches. And I kept being interrupted by just the distance in time and space between myself and these other providers. And that distance in time and space ended up in just making less efficient care for the consumer who was in front of me. And so, I don't know, about 10 years ago, maybe a little more, I wrote this original business plan that was kind of, if any of you have heard of salon lofts, it's kind of the salon loft model where we gather like-minded health and wellness entrepreneurs in the same physical space. We support them from the back end, operations and administration and strategy, with the goal of bringing these aligned brands together to improve how consumers access and receive care. So essentially trying to build a little mini hospital system, but kind of off of that salon lofts model.
Okay. Yeah, I'm very familiar with salon lofts. I think I've actually even had my hair cut in a salon loft at some point over the years. So, tell us what prompted you to want to start your own business and go in this direction?
I don't know. After getting a tax bill today, I'm not so sure I want to stay with it. But I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad started his business when I was, I don't know, in 2000. So however old I was, 15, out of our basement in our garage, and I was doing his accounts receivable and payable. My aunt is a business owner. My uncle's a business owner. So I kind of grew up around entrepreneurs who were kind of get shit done type people. And if there wasn't a system that was good for them, then they made their own. And so I bought my first Entrepreneurship for Dummies book really, really young, actually, like when I was like 10. And so I think I just always kind of had the bug, studied business in school, graduated, took my first like staff PT job, which is the first position any PT can start with. And within a year, I was just bored. And I started asking my boss at the time, like, can I look at your numbers? Can I understand? Can I start suggesting ideas? And eventually at the end of my first year, he promoted me to clinical director. And at the end of year 2, he offered me partnership. And so I took that and quickly learned why he needed a partner. And learned a ton there, but I went and functioned as a consultant for a startup PT practice who at the time was an out-of-network practice, which is probably one of the first in town. This was about, this was 2013, so however many years ago that was. And, a cash-based PT was really new, but it was where I was wanting to go because I was seeing 4 or 5 patients an hour, 40 hours a week, trying to run a practice, and it was just exhausting and toxic. And so I helped run this other practice as a consultant for 5 years, which was also just nice for me, good way to kind of practice building that entrepreneurial skill set, but without it being 100% on me. And so that was really neat. We grew up a practice from the 2 of us to a size of 12 by the time I left. And ultimately, I think like most entrepreneurs, I left because the math didn't make sense, right? I became more valuable every year that went on and I wasn't getting paid for it. So, ultimately it was relatively a shotgun decision to open Anchor in 2019. But like I said, I had written the business plan. I was just young and nervous and had a lot of school debt, and not quite as confident in my skills and my ability to do it. And then 2019, it kind of came down to just math, and it was like, all right, let's go. This is the time. So learned a lot in the last 5 years that I think if I knew now what, if I knew then what I know now, so not
Yeah.
so sure I would still, that I always tell people the grass isn't always greener.
Right.
It's definitely a wild ride, and you at least have autonomy and self-control, which you don't have as an employee necessarily, but it definitely comes with its ups and downs.
Yeah. I think you almost have to start a business as a shotgun approach. Otherwise, you sit there and you just overthink it and overthink it and overthink it. And 5 years, 10 years later, you're still thinking about it. So I think
Yeah,
some of
and
the most successful business owners are ones that said, listen, I'm just going to go. Let's
yeah,
just get this done. Let's do it.
I think generally entrepreneurs are pretty risk averse. So I think, I knew what it took to be successful, and I knew I had that. It was just whether or not I wanted the headache.
Right.
Well,
Right.
quite frankly, at the time, for me, one of my main goals was starting my business is having supported and worked with two previous entrepreneurs. I knew I didn't want to get upside down. So I knew I wanted to have cash going into it, and I wanted to not go in debt. So that was, my primary decision making was just what's my break even point and can I get there month one? And I know not a lot of entrepreneurs have that luxury, but being in a service base versus a product base, I didn't really have a lot of upfront expenses. And just in the business that I was starting, I started small and contained, and have kind of lived with that philosophy of like go slow and grow.
Yeah.
So that I feel like was an advantage, especially opening 9 months prior to a pandemic.
Right. But which is always interesting. I hear great stories
Yeah,
about
in a
that time.
way. Yeah, to think back now, it fortunately offered me some great advantages, like getting into the real estate where we are now.
Yeah.
But because I was able to operate off of, a quick cash cycle, and, I basically started my business with a 0% interest credit card. And so, I didn't really have a lot of debt, and I didn't have a lot of liabilities going into the pandemic. So we fared okay because of that. If
That's
we were
great.
in the situation we're in now, that would have been a different story.
Right. What were some of the biggest struggles or biggest challenges to getting your business up and running that you had to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, well, the pandemic was one.
Yeah.
So this is a co-working space, for lack of a better word, during a pandemic when the majority of service-based providers were either shut down or moved virtual. So a little bit of a struggle in having to flex a little bit when we got started, and this was originally a brick and mortar, and we had to adapt a little bit to say, okay, well, we work with virtual providers, and if we're going to do that, how do we still solve for the problem that most hospital systems have, which is that the providers are disconnected. And so we had to really flex there to be able to accommodate just the change in the environment of the services. Um, and then I would say just the other, I think for most startups, just recognizing our value, right? So because of the pandemic and wanting to get people back into the physical space, we really gave access to our network at a pretty discounted rate, because we were just trying to prove the concept. But then you got to be able to like know that there's a concise period of time that reduction is going to be present. And it was like, the end of last year where I was thinking, what the heck? Like, we're still not as profitable as we should be or need to be. When we realized like, oh, well, we've never changed our prices since 2020. Like, so just that permission to, and the risk, of saying, hey, look, our prices increased quite a bit for our entrepreneurs who are inside of our network, going into this year. And that was a scary conversation, but fortunately we had already proven our value. And so we didn't lose anybody, and everybody was more than happy and understood the increase.
Yeah. Yeah. I've talked to several entrepreneurs, small business owners over the last few months that were in the same situation where they their prices were way below market prices, and they were just concerned about raising them, but they finally did. And just like you, they found that it was not a big deal. There was not a
Yeah,
lot of
the
turmoil.
Harvard Business Review published an article that an 8.5% annual change in cost pretty much goes unnoticed by your consumer.
Yeah.
And so for the entrepreneurs who are in our network, we're trying to encourage them like, hey, you're getting smarter, you're getting better, you're reinvesting
Yeah.
in your equipment and your facilities and your team. All of these things are reasons to improve your value. And we teach them about the rule of one and how you can increase your volume 1%, you can decrease your cost 1%, or increase your value 1%. And ultimately, it
Yeah.
almost always results in a 19% change when you actually sit down and do the math of what your net value looks like. So, but that's a learning curve, right? It takes time and it
Yeah.
takes proof of concept to be able to say like, okay, yeah, people are willing to spend what I'm charging for this particular
Right.
service.
Right. For sure. When you look back all these these years of owning your own business, is there anything that you would have done differently? Not differently as a career, but differently as growing your business or starting your business?
I would have done a lot more work on myself before starting my business. I think that has been, when I say the grass isn't greener, for me, a lot of the trials and tribulations have come with the people.
Right.
And I've been really fortunate to work with and alongside excellent people. But my own personal weaknesses, my own IQ and EQ deficiencies are
Right.
really, I think, probably the primary barrier of growth for this business. And fortunately, I had a really great coach who challenged a lot of my own beliefs and personal systems. But yeah, I would say I would have liked to have gone back and done a lot more self work before I jumped in and really known, okay, Sarah, like, what are you really good at and what are you not?
I think that's probably good advice for a lot of people starting their own businesses.
Yeah, um, there's I forget what the graph is called, but it's like what you know about yourself, what other people know about yourself, what you don't know about yourself, and what other people don't know about yourself.
Yeah.
And that whole like knowing what you don't know and what others don't know is really
Yeah.
powerful
Yeah.
because it allows you to open a window and either outsource it and say, okay, this isn't a strength of mine. And I know that it's never going to be even if I were to work on it, it's never going to be as good as that thing that naturally comes easy. But I also just think it allows you to be vulnerable with the people that when you're growing to say, look, this isn't my skill set, or, just taking responsibility up front. And those are lessons that, I've learned after losing partners or losing employees that, I think could have prevented some of that loss.
But you learned, and going
Yeah,
forward, and now you can provide a lot of good advice to people that are soon to be in your situation. So
working on it.
yeah. So what are some common misconceptions that people think about business owners,
Oh, well, like I
or
said,
about owning a business, I should say?
yeah, I mean, I would say the first one is I think that that they think it's ultimate flexibility, and I feel more tethered to work than I ever have. Um, the flexibility is different, in that I make the choice of a weekend where I'm going to just primarily focus on family versus catch up on some work that I didn't get done. So I think I always tell people who I'm speaking with who are considering entrepreneurship, like eyes wide open, right? It's not, there is just sort of grit and tenacity that has to go into starting a business. You do just sort of have to work. I also believe in, burnout prevention and pacing yourself and coming to grips with the fact that you can't win at everything all the time. And so, when you might be really killing it at work, you might not be making it to every extracurricular activity of your kids or of your family or your friends. So I think the balance piece is definitely a misnomer for most. And I also think that people think that they have to have a lot of money to get started. And I think there's ways to start an entrepreneurship journey that don't take a lot of cash. I think that was one of the things that held me back. I was so nervous to go out and do it on my own. 10 years ago, however long ago it was, when I first wrote this business plan, and ultimately like just working the math backwards to find out like, what do you need? What do you need to take home? What do you need to pay your bills? And then how do you start working backwards? And then what is your marker for knowing when it's time to just dive all in? And so, yeah, I think just again, that goes back to knowing yourself and knowing your value. But I would say the idea that you have to go all in right away is sometimes a bit of a misnomer as well.
Right. So you alluded to this a second ago, just work-life balance. And this is a common theme on this podcast because I've struggled with work-life balance my whole career, 28 years, and I still do to some degree. Do you believe in work-life balance? Do you believe that can be achieved, or how do you work to try to find some amount of work-life balance?
Yeah. Do I believe in work-life balance? Yes and no. So where I would say, as an entrepreneur, let me say that. As an employee, I 100% believe in work-life balance. As a founder, I think it's really challenging. Where I've come to grips with is not necessarily time, like the amount of hours, but more my energy. So as long as I still have energy in my bank to exercise, be present with my kids, go on a walk, get good sleep, to me, I call that a win, right? I don't need to have 25% of my day go to, things outside of work, but I need to have the energy to be able to accomplish those things that make me feel good in places outside of my title as CEO. And so, I think that is where I go back to that comment on like tenacity and grit. There are seasons of busyness and there are seasons of slowness. And I think the longer you're in the game as an entrepreneur, the more you can predict that and ride that wave. And then I also believe that sometimes you just have to lift the oar and let the work that you've put in just go. And I think a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we feel insufficient, or maybe I should say I feel insufficient if I'm not accomplishing a lot as a type A, high achieving Enneagram 3. Like if I'm not checking boxes, if my metrics aren't green, I feel like I've failed. So I think where some of that personal work has allowed me to grow is recognizing that sometimes doing nothing on a particular day for my business is actually better for the long-term health of it than it is for me to just put my head down and work.
Yeah. For me, work-life balance is if I'm trying my hardest to find some work-life balance and I'm trying my hardest to make the majority of the events and lacrosse games and things of that nature, I consider that a win. And I think it's when you don't try and you just completely avoid it, that's when it can be more challenging.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when your health starts to suffer, I mean, those to me, right? I think if you're losing sleep, if you're eating poorly, if you're not moving your body, and that's what I always come back to when I have these moments. I actually just said this in my team meeting last week. Like, when we talk about every week, we ask our employees, what's the best thing that's happened to you in the last week? What's your biggest challenge in the last week? And what's your goal for the next 7 days? And my challenge has consistently been self-care. And so but I say that to my team, right? I put it out there as like, this is a thing that I'm struggling with right now. And I feel like a fraud given that I own a health and wellness business.
Right.
And so a lot of it comes back to me of just recalibrating my expectations, right? If I can take a 10-minute walk, that's moving my body. If I can squeeze in a 20-minute workout, but what I haven't let go of is sleep. because when my sleep is sacrificed, everything else goes. So I
Yeah.
think you just have to pick and choose your battles and really set expectations that are fair, and realize that there are different seasons. I might be
Yeah.
able to do a little bit more, come this winter, than maybe I have this past spring and summer.
Yeah. Right. So do you have a support team that keeps you on track either at home or at work, or a combination of both?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I do tell a lot of friends who are considering entrepreneurship, and even the ones that work with us, like, there's 0% chance I could do this without my spouse. I formally asked him to take a position within my business several years back, and he declined graciously. Um, for a variety of reasons, all of which he was right. But he did offer me that, like, I've got home taken care of, so you do what you
Right.
need to do. If you need an evening meeting, if you need an early morning, if you have to be out on the weekend, I've got you. And that's a huge asset to have. I have a variety of coaches. I've got an executive coach, I've got a traditional business coach, and I've got a
Yeah.
PT business coach who specifically has helped me with my practice that's housed inside of Anchor Wellness. Um, I've got a whole network of female founders. Fortunately, I've
Okay.
been able to find this really great network here in Cincinnati of female founders, across a bunch of different industries, which is also really nice. Um, and I'm in a business support organization called Entrepreneur Organization, EO, which is an international organization, which has been highly pivotal. So, yeah, those are my sort of outsourced board, if you will. And then, the way I'm looking at building the businesses that I own is, I'm just consistently trying to fire myself from roles,
Right.
which has been successful and unsuccessful. And so, each iteration gets a little closer, but I primarily have one director of operations who kind of helps me with all of my businesses and is kind of a right hand woman to me. And then I've got a kind of an executive assistant who manages a lot of our administrative stuff. So far we've been pretty good with that, but really, each year trying to fire myself from different positions that
Yeah.
I currently am responsible for.
Yeah. So you have a pretty strong a group, a pretty strong support team, home, work, coaches, etc. Would you say that it's if you were talking to someone that was getting ready to start a business, or maybe they were 1 or 2 years and they didn't have a support team, would you tell them that it's probably critical to put together a support team to help get them
Yeah.
through it?
Yeah. Because they know what you don't. And I
Yeah.
realize that the cost and the fees are scary. My suggestion is to do your due diligence,
Yeah.
get your reference checks, ask current customers of that particular coach. Each that I've worked with,
Yeah.
even just from the first step, like the first person I outsourced was marketing, or well, web design, and then some marketing. And those were both ridiculously scary. How am I going to pay for this? How is it going to make its
Yeah.
return on investment? And I would say the one thing I've learned that I would openly share with other business owners is that you can't quantify every outsourced service provider on an ROI, because there's not always going to be a direct way to link back what that particular investment made you. But it's on you to make use of that particular investment. And so, where I
Yeah.
see a lot of people complain, including providers who have joined the Anchor Wellness Center, the ones who don't feel like they get anything out of it are the ones who haven't made the most out of the opportunity.
Right.
And fortunately, we've not lost many. Um, due to our vetting process. But there's very much there's a little bit of just to trust your gut, but there's a lot of due diligence to do just to make sure that you're working with the right person.
Yeah. With the business and family and everything that's going on there, how do you continue to stay motivated? You seem like you're incredibly busy, a lot going on. I mean, how do you keep that motivation?
Oh, I don't know. It's Monday, so ask me for no. I think that's just in my DNA. My husband and I were talking about this with our kids. We've got one kid who has no competitive spirit at all, and another who, wants to knock everyone dead. And we're like, how do we, how did our parents help us? We're both high achieving people. How did we get this way? And I think it's just who we are, who
Yeah.
I am. And now I've got a lot of people that are sort of responsible for, that I'm responsible for in a certain way. So, these people that I've told, hey, we've got a built-in coaching platform as well as your operations and administrative support. And then, from my physical therapy team, hey, I've got your salaries to pay,
Yeah.
and your benefits and all that stuff. So I think just the fact that I'm one of those people that will do what I say I'm going to do. And I've got a lot of people's livelihoods that I'm,
Yeah.
some way, somehow attached to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you have other people's livelihood attached to your business, it makes things easier to be motivated.
Yeah. And, and ultimately, I want to change the world of healthcare. And so I've got a really big, hairy, audacious goal to use a Vern Harnish term. Um, but I've got this really big goal, and quite frankly, I like making money. And
Yeah.
so, my goal is to build this thing and eventually sell it and make all of this time, effort, and sweat equity worthwhile. And
Yeah.
and that's not going to happen by me just kind of sitting around.
No, it won't. No, it won't. That's a great goal. So where do you see your business in the next 12 to 36 months?
Um, that's a great question. So, you were still kind of teetering with for Anchor Wellness Center. My original goal was franchising the model, and I've been able to prove the financial feasibility of it. The question is, now it just comes down to really a lot of consulting with other franchisees and franchisors, and determining whether or not that's the best way to go, or me just owner operator of additional facilities. So I'd like to say in 36 months we have another center located outside of this greater Cincinnati region. So this has been the question we've been debating for the last 12 to 18 months of
Right.
uh, what makes more financial sense. And a lot of it might not make a lot of financial sense as much as it is reputation um, and just what impact I have in the world.
Yeah.
I do want to make money, but I don't want to do so at the sake of quality. And
Yeah.
so that's really where we're kind of sitting with these numbers to say, is it better for, the global industry for us to maintain control, or can we figure out a way to do that on a franchisor
Yeah.
basis? So yeah, I'd say in the next 36 for sure, we'd like to have another location outside of this region.
Yeah. I was thinking when you were saying franchising, I was thinking quality as well. How does the other office have the same quality? If I went to your office and then one day I had to go to another office, how would I get the exact same quality of care? That always seems like a concern. I think we've all been to franchise restaurants before, where there's two locations and we all talk about, well, if you're going to go there, you have to go to the location downtown because it's better, right? Why is it better? It should be exactly the same.
Mhm.
But in most instances, it's not. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. And for me, growing two businesses simultaneously, going back to that work-life balance, I'm
yeah,
always balancing my two businesses of which one am
yeah,
I paying more attention to on any given day, week, month? Um, and so, a lot of times it's my PT practice is what really allowed me to get the Anchor Wellness Center off the ground and fund it initially. And so, again, my goal is to have 3 locations for my PT
yeah,
practice, all of which are primarily provided without me being the practitioner. So,
right,
there's a delicate balance of where my energy goes, and what I've given up on is trying to grow the Anchor Wellness Center at rapid speed. Because that was my goal initially was to be franchised within 5 years. Now that I know a little bit more,
yeah,
I think I'm still trying to figure it out because I haven't been convinced one way or the other just yet.
yeah. What's the best business advice anybody's ever given you over the last however many years?
Oh, hire slow, fire fast.
Mhm. I've
That
heard that
one,
before.
yeah,
Yeah.
that one comes to mind quickly. And then I'd say fail fast too. If something's not working, be willing to make a change quickly. Um, both things, if I would have known when I started these businesses, maybe I'd be a little bit further ahead than I am right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's why it just comes back to that personal relationship with self of like not being willing to be vulnerable with yourself to say like, okay, look, that was a bad idea. Like, even though it was mine, I originated it, I started it, I did all the thought processes, and it was still bad, right? I think
Yeah.
we attach so much of ourselves to these businesses. And so I would say if there was any advice that I would have heard from somebody when I started is to just like go in without an ego.
Yeah.
Because I think that ego is what often gets in the way of growth.
Yeah. Is there any additional advice that you would give to somebody who's thinking about starting a business, but they just can't get over the hump and
Use a
they just
coach.
jump in there? Use a
Yeah,
coach.
use a coach. I mean, there's just that why recreate the wheel, right? I mean, that's the beauty of coaching and of people who have experience is, I think back at the PT coach that I use, I interviewed probably a year prior to engaging, and I had probably talked with them 6 months prior to that. So we had an 18-month nurturing process before I said go. And from the time I started with them until now, I 4x'd my business
That's great.
in 2 years. And just because they had the experience of the systems and, a lot of that back end stuff. And it was really expensive. And that was the fear. It was really expensive. And what was that going to do to my bottom line? But it's been worth its weight in gold.
Yeah. I think a lot of people refuse to look at a coach because they're afraid to say that maybe I don't know everything or something of that nature. I find that a lot. So you think that's a common thing for
Um,
business owners?
Yeah. So, I approach the different coaches I have, which are three of them, well, I shouldn't say that, it's a little more than that, but three organizations I'll go with different goals, right? And I tell people this about their own healthcare team, right? You need to build the team that is able to support you with different things, but like your primary care provider is not going to be able to support all of your health needs.
Right.
They're going to be able to support one, or they're going to be able to QB and send you out. With my businesses, I rely on one coach for a certain area of business ship. And then, I use an executive coach for more my own leadership style, helping me bring attention to my own deficiencies. I have a mental health therapist that does the same thing. And then I have a different coach that's a lot broader, that's more like growth focused,
Right.
like helping me, okay, like what's my 10-year goal and how do we work backwards? So I do think that again, having now worked with so many coaches who are outside of my own industry, I can confidently say it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right. But when you start and you're just so convicted in what you know and what the other person doesn't, and you're so green about business, you just don't know what you don't know. So, I would say like from my experience, and I guess I'll disclose that like you are not one of my coaches, so I shouldn't sound like I'm tooting your horn, but like
Right.
from my own experiences working with some of my coaches who are outside of my industry has been far more beneficial for that 10x goal of mine than just the short term goals that I have for both of them. Like specifically, I at the end of last year, I worked with a executive coach who's typically like almost $1,000 an hour. He just happened to be a client of mine, and we were talking over the table. And then he was like, you want me to help you with this? And I mean, in a matter of hours, he exposed some huge deficits which turned into opportunities for us. And that was unintentional. That was not me seeking out somebody, but he was really like the catalyst to me looking at my business saying, we are way more valuable than what we're currently charging. And if anybody's ever going to pay me for this concept, I better figure out how to make that better.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think, like, for me, it's all kind of happened very organically. But yes, if I could go back and do it again, I would have hired a coach day one, even just to look at my business plan, just to say, even to solidify my business plan. There's some other data, you probably know this better than me, but out of Harvard Business Review, that businesses that operate with a business plan are like 76% more sustainable than businesses that don't have one. I wrote one and then I didn't really ever come back to it until last year.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
That
something you have to, right. And sometimes you have to revisit it on a quarterly basis. Just to make sure that
I look
things
at
are on
mine
track.
now monthly.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it changes, and not being stuck to it, right? Like, you got to be able to ebb and flow with it. So
That's
yeah,
right.
those are all things I wish I would have done. And I tell this to our entrepreneurs in our network, like, start writing everything down, start creating your systems. Even when you're a solopreneur and you're a team of one, like, write down everything you do, because eventually you're going to bring on somebody else. But if you had somebody who was holding you accountable to that, weekly or monthly, that's a game changer in terms of growth without as much headache.
Right.
Changing culture later is very hard.
Right.
Setting the culture from the get-go is and I've experienced this 2 or 3 times now. It's my biggest regret.
Yeah. Yep. I think accountability is key, especially for me. Listen, that was a ton of great advice for everybody out there listening. And I really, really appreciate you taking time to be on my podcast. If somebody wants to get a hold of you and Anchor Wellness Center, how can they reach out to you?
Sure. So our website is anchorcincy with a Y, CINCY.com. They're always welcome to directly reach out to me at Sarah with an H, SARAH at anchorcincy.com is my email. And you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Anchor Wellness Cincy is our handle for all of them. And on LinkedIn, I'm sure I'm on there somewhere.
We all are. All right. Well, listen, once again, I really appreciate you taking part. And for everybody out there, I appreciate you listening in. Take care. Have a great week.
Thanks, Joe.
You've just experienced another insightful episode of Mastering the Numbers. We hope you enjoyed the journey and gained valuable insights to fuel your financial success. Don't forget to subscribe to Mastering the Numbers on your favorite podcast platform to never miss an episode. And be sure to leave us a review to let us know how we're doing. Until next time, keep pushing forward and let your entrepreneurial spirit soar. Thank you for listening.